What if the story of the Tower of Babel is not about arrogance at all, but about a forgotten attempt to pierce the veil between worlds? What if the builders of that mysterious structure were not foolish rebels stacking bricks toward a childish dream of touching the clouds, but initiates, architects of a ritual machine designed to open a portal? For centuries, we were told a simplified version. Men grew proud, God grew angry, and language was shattered as punishment. But buried beneath this tale is something far more unsettling. Think of it. Why would the divine creator of galaxies and suns fear a tower made of mud bricks and tar? Why would an omnipotent being need to descend personally to see what they were building unless the project carried a secret power not explained in Sunday school? The text itself whispers an enigma. Now nothing will be impossible for them. Nothing? That is not the language of divine mockery. It is the language of caution, perhaps even alarm. Across the ancient world, towers were never just buildings. Ziggurats in Mesopotamia were not homes for humans, but stairways for gods. Egyptian pyramids aligned with stars, serving as resonant chambers for the soul. Temples in India rose as replicas of Mount Meru, the cosmic axis that links heaven and earth. Everywhere we look, civilizations raised mountains of stone or brick to create contact points between the seen and unseen. Why would Babel be different? Or rather, why would it not be the boldest attempt of all to construct not only a temple but a device of ascent? The church simplified the story into a warning against pride. But occult traditions, Kabbalistic whispers, and Masonic symbols suggest another reading. The builders were decoding the language of creation itself. A tongue not merely of words, but of frequencies, names, and resonances that align matter with spirit. The confusion of languages was not a childish scattering of accents. It was the deliberate severing of humanity's access to a cosmic code that could unlock realities beyond the veil. Tonight, we begin with that forbidden question. Was Babel a rebellion against God, or a near-successful attempt to breach the heavens? Was the tower destroyed because it threatened divine order, or because it almost worked? Before we climb the ruins of Babel, a word of clarity. What you are about to hear is not dogma, not church doctrine, and not absolute truth. It is a journey through fragments, biblical verses, Mesopotamian myths, occult traditions, and the echoes of forgotten sciences. Some of what follows belongs to archaeology, some to mysticism, and some to the imagination that dares to connect them. Take it as exploration, not commandment. Eternal Enigma does not hand you answers. We hand you keys. Keys to questions you were warned not to ask. Was the tower truly an act of arrogance, or the memory of a portal shut down by force? Was the confusion of languages punishment or containment? As always, I invite you to listen. The official story of Babel sits in just a few verses of Genesis 11, yet it has shaped millennia of theology. Humanity, we are told, spoke one language, united in word and purpose. They journeyed east and settled on the plain of Shinar. There they began to build a city with a tower whose top would reach unto heaven. Their motive, according to the text, was to make a name for themselves, lest they be scattered across the earth. The narrative is striking for its brevity. No details of architecture, no explanation of rituals, no description of the builder's deeper intentions, only the simple charge of human pride. God descends, observes, and declares, "Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language, and now nothing will be impossible for them." Then the judgment. He confuses their language, halts the work, and scatters them over the face of the earth. The tower remains unfinished, a monument not to ambition but to divine interruption. That is the Sunday school version. Straightforward, digestible, but look closely. Why does the text itself record God's concern in such ominous words? Nothing will be impossible for them. Why does an omnipotent being need to intervene at all, unless the project carried a weight beyond mere arrogance? These verses read less like a father stopping children from stacking blocks, and more like a sovereign halting an experiment that threatened to succeed. Furthermore, the punishment does not match the crime. If arrogance was the sin, why not humble the builders, destroy the structure, or remind them of their limits? Instead, the penalty is fragmentation of language, a strange, almost surgical move. The builders wanted unity, and God fractured communication itself. Pride might be checked by disaster, but language shattered. That feels like a calculated strike at something more essential, the very code that powered their work. Orthodox tradition insists on the moral lesson: man must not challenge heaven. But the cracks in the story suggest another reading. The builders may not have been climbing into the clouds. They may have been constructing a ladder of words, symbols, and stones that aligned heaven and earth. And the true threat was not their height, but their harmony, a collective voice that resonated as one, perhaps unlocking a frequency too dangerous to be left unchecked. Thus, in the official story, pride is punished, languages are confused, humanity is dispersed. But behind the brevity of Genesis lies a question whispered across centuries. What exactly was humanity building, and why did it frighten even the heavens? To understand Babel, we must return to the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia. The Hebrew scribes who wrote Genesis lived in a world overshadowed by colossal structures called ziggurats, stepped temples built of sun-dried bricks, rising like artificial mountains from the plains. These were not palaces nor watchtowers for defense. They were sacred machines of stone designed to connect earth to heaven. One of the most famous stood in Babylon itself, the Enki, whose name in Akkadian means house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Archaeologists have pieced together fragments of its dimensions, 7 stories high, nearly 100 meters tall, dominating the skyline of the ancient city. To climb its steps was to ascend symbolically toward the dwelling place of the gods, culminating in a shrine at the summit where priests awaited divine descent. The logic of the ziggurat was not vertical ambition, but cosmic negotiation. Mesopotamians did not imagine humans climbing up to invade heaven. They believed the gods needed a landing platform to descend. The ziggurat was a stairway for the divine, a fixed AXIS MUNDI, a bridge between the mortal and the eternal. Every brick laid was part of a ritual. Inscriptions describe kings mixing clay with precious stones, consecrating bricks with chants, embedding names of deities in the very foundations. Architecture was not neutral, it was magical. Now recall the biblical phrase, a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. In Hebrew, this does not imply physical height alone. It suggests a structure whose summit is in the heavens, a meeting point. The scribes who penned the story in Genesis likely had the Enki in mind. To them, the Tower of Babel was not fantasy, it was memory, filtered through theology. This changes the question. The builders of Babel were not rebels stacking a skyscraper. They were priests and masons of an ancient science. They believed that through architecture, ritual, and language, they could weld together heaven and earth. And if their project was modeled after the great ziggurats of Babylon, then Babel was not arrogance, it was technology. Perhaps this is why the biblical God felt threatened. Not because of pride, but because the builders were reviving a Mesopotamian art that could summon forces, open portals, and align human will with divine currents. A ziggurat was not just a tower, it was a key. And Babel, in that light, was humanity's hand reaching once more for the lock. If the ziggurats of Mesopotamia were stairways for the gods, then architecture itself was never neutral. It was not simply a matter of walls and roofs, but of designing thresholds. Every line, every proportion, every alignment carried symbolic weight. Sacred architecture was conceived as a mirror of the cosmos, an attempt to reproduce heaven on earth, and in doing so, open a channel between them. Across civilizations, the same pattern emerges. Egyptian pyramids were aligned with Orion's belt, functioning as star maps and as resonant chambers that preserved the body for the soul's journey. The Mayan pyramids of Chichen Itza were designed so that at equinox, light formed the image of a serpent descending the steps, an architectural invocation of divine presence. In Hindu temples, the towering Shikara symbolized Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain linking heaven, earth, and underworld. Even in medieval cathedrals, stained glass, vaulted ceilings, and geometric ratios were meant to create not just beauty, but cosmic resonance, a space where prayers rose like vibrations into the unseen. When Genesis speaks of Babel's tower with its top in the heavens, the phrase carries this architectural tradition, a building that is not just tall, but aligned, a structure intentionally constructed to overlap with celestial patterns. Ancient builders knew the stars were not distant decorations, they were coordinates. By aligning towers to constellations, they created earthly replicas of heavenly order. To climb such a structure was to move step by step through a cosmic diagram until reaching the point where the mortal and immortal intersected. This is the lens through which Babel must be seen. The builders were not naive dreamers thinking bricks could puncture the sky. They were initiates encoding the heavens into Earth's clay, raising a monument that doubled as a machine of resonance. Every chant, every measurement, every placement of stone was part of a formula. The tower was both building and ritual, matter and symbol fused into one. And herein lies the forbidden suggestion. The Tower of Babel was less like a skyscraper and more like a portal generator. Its architecture did not aim to defy God physically, but to bridge dimensions symbolically. To climb it was to ascend consciousness. To complete it was to reopen the gate between realms. And perhaps that is precisely why it was stopped. The Bible insists that before Babel, the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. At first glance, this seems to describe nothing more than a common tongue. But in esoteric traditions, the phrase has far deeper resonance. The one language was not simply a dialect spoken by ancient tribes. It was the primordial code, a speech aligned with creation itself. Think of Genesis 1. The world is not crafted by hammer and chisel, but by words. Let there be light. The spoken command becomes matter. In Hebrew mysticism, this is the foundation of the Kabbalah. Each letter is not only a symbol, but a force, a vibration of divine energy. Words are not labels, they are keys of reality. To speak in the original tongue was to participate in the ongoing act of creation. If we apply this lens to Babel, the unity of language takes on a terrifying implication. Humanity, working together, was not just coordinating bricks and mortar. They were channeling a collective resonance. The same word on 1,000 lips would not merely mean the same thing. It would vibrate with power, shaping the spiritual atmosphere, feeding the tower with energy beyond stone and clay. This is why occultists often suggest that the confusion of tongues was not a random punishment, but a surgical strike. God, or the higher powers, did not topple the tower. They dismantled the frequency that powered it. By scattering speech, they broke the collective chant. The work stopped, not because hands grew weak, but because voices could no longer harmonize the formula. Echoes of this lost language appear in many traditions. In Hinduism, mantras are syllables believed to embody cosmic forces. Om is the primordial sound. In Islamic mysticism, the hidden names of God carry creative potency. In Hermetic lore, to know the true names of things is to hold mastery over them. Even science whispers the same truth. Vibration shapes matter, resonance organizes chaos. Thus, the one language of Babel may have been the original science of sound, a language that did not describe reality but commanded it. When that tongue was fractured, humanity lost not just communication, but cosmic agency. Every dialect since then, every scattered alphabet, is a shard of the shattered mirror. Perhaps this is the true tragedy of Babel, not that men built too high, but that they once sang in harmony with the universe, and that harmony was silenced. If Babel's builders possessed a unified language that resonated with creation itself, then the tower was not simply a monument, it was a device. The story of bricks and mortar becomes a veil for something closer to technology, though not in the modern mechanical sense. It was a technology of ritual, resonance, and alignment, a synthesis of architecture and sacred speech designed to manipulate the fabric of reality. The choice of materials, even in the text, is suspiciously emphasized. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." Why note the detail of fire-hardened bricks? To the esoteric mind, this is alchemical language, clay of the earth, transformed by fire into a new substance. Each brick becomes a symbol of transmutation, earth elevated through flame. To stack them into a tower was to build a ladder of transformed matter, each layer ascending closer to the divine. Imagine the construction as ritual, 1,000 workers chanting in unison, each syllable vibrating through the bricks as they laid them. Every step upward was not just labor but liturgy. The tower itself became a tuning fork, amplifying the resonance of a unified humanity. This was not an act of rebellion alone, it was the creation of a portal generator, and the biblical response makes sense only under this frame. If it were just pride, why not destroy the city with fire, flood, or plague as elsewhere in Scripture? But instead, the work is stopped at its core, the language that powered it. The project was too dangerous to be left in human hands. It was forbidden technology, not because it was useless, but because it was effective. Occult parallels abound. In the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, the universe is structured by permutations of letters and numbers. In Hermetic lore, pyramids and temples serve as machines of initiation, shifting the initiate's consciousness. In alchemy, the union of elements creates a philosopher's stone, not just chemically but spiritually. Babel fits into this continuum as a great collective attempt to weaponize sacred architecture and language into a working gateway. Thus, the Tower of Babel was not halted because it failed. It was halted because it was working too well. Humanity, for one dangerous moment, approached a breakthrough. They were on the edge of opening a passage not meant to be crossed, and so the tower was frozen mid-construction, a monument not of failure but of sabotage from above. If we strip away the literal bricks of Babel and look at the tower symbolically, a new pattern emerges. The structure becomes less a building of clay and more a map of the cosmos, a symbolic ladder linking the human to the divine. Every level of the tower can be read as a stage of initiation, every ascent a movement of consciousness. In this light, Babel was not only forbidden technology, but a blueprint of the soul. In Kabbalah, the tree of life is composed of 10 sephirot, spheres of divine emanation connected by 22 paths. To climb it is to journey from the mundane world, Malkuth, to the divine crown, Keter. The Tower of Babel mirrors this pattern, a vertical ascent from earth to heaven, step by step through layers of existence. Each level may correspond to planetary forces: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, exactly the 7 classical planets revered in antiquity. The tower thus becomes a 7-stepped ladder of the stars, a terrestrial imitation of the heavens. Other traditions echo the same idea. In Hermetic texts, the soul after death ascends through planetary spheres, shedding illusions and gaining wisdom. In alchemy, the ladder of metals transforms base lead into gold, stage by stage. In mystery cults, initiates were led through chambers representing cosmic zones until they emerged as reborn beings. The tower, in its most esoteric reading, encapsulates all of these, a stairway of initiation, hidden in plain sight. This is why the biblical God's intervention is so symbolic. The builders were not just rising physically, they were attempting to scale the hierarchy of existence without permission. To the Orthodox view, this was arrogance, but to the occultist, it was acceleration, a ritual shortcut to gnosis. The tower was an artificial tree of life, constructed not of emanations but of bricks and chance, daring to force open the gates of heaven. The symbology survives in scattered places. The Masonic unfinished tower represents knowledge interrupted. Tarot's tower card depicts sudden disruption of false ascent. Even Dante's Divine Comedy includes the image of a cosmic mountain climbed by souls. All these trace back, directly or indirectly, to Babel as archetype, the vertical bridge between realms, broken before its completion. Thus, Babel's greatest secret may be this: the story was never about height in meters, but height in meaning. The true tower stood not on the plane of Shinar, but in the human imagination, an ascent of consciousness cut down before its top reached the stars. While the book of Genesis gives us only a sparse account of Babel, Jewish mysticism and rabbinic commentary fill in gaps with details that often sound closer to occult speculation than to Sunday school morality. The rabbis did not see the builders merely as arrogant masons stacking bricks. They imagined them as magicians, astrologers, and ritualists attempting to manipulate the heavens. In the Midrash Rabbah, one tradition claims the builders intended to ascend to the heavens to wage war against God himself. Yet even in this exaggerated imagery, what stands out is not the height of the tower, but the idea of humans using ritual means to penetrate divine space. Another rabbinic legend insists that the tower was covered in astrological symbols, functioning as a great zodiacal chart carved into brick, aligning the structure with the stars. In this sense, Babel becomes less a tower of pride and more a celestial instrument, a physical horoscope raised to the skies. Other Jewish texts link Babel to the forbidden art of summoning and binding angels. The rabbis knew the legend of King Solomon, who centuries later was said to control spirits through the use of a magical seal, commanding them to build the Temple of Jerusalem. If Solomon could harness demons for construction, perhaps the builders of Babel attempted something similar, forcing heaven's messengers into labor, binding powers that were never meant to be bound. In this context, the punishment becomes a cosmic reset button, stopping the abuse of spiritual laws. Kabbalistic echoes deepen the mystery. In mystical thought, Hebrew letters are not arbitrary symbols, but living channels of divine energy. To combine them correctly is to participate in creation itself. The builders of Babel, united in one tongue, might have spoken not common speech, but the primordial Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language of power. Their chants, unified, could have shaken the very foundations of the heavens. The confusion of tongues then becomes a deliberate fracturing of the Sephirotic flow, cutting humanity off from the cosmic current. The contrast with Solomon is telling. Where Babel is condemned, Solomon is celebrated for using spirits to build God's house. Why? Perhaps because Solomon's temple was sanctioned while Babel's tower was unsanctioned, a work of humanity reaching upward without divine permission. The line between sacred temple and forbidden tower, then, is not about architecture but about authority. Who controls the gate, man or God? Thus, in Jewish mysticism, Babel becomes both warning and temptation. A warning that the misuse of heavenly names can break the world, and a temptation to imagine what might have happened had the tower been completed, its summit blazing with chants that opened the heavens like a door. If rabbinic tradition paints Babel as a rebellion against heaven, the Gnostics reframed it through an entirely different lens, not rebellion, but escape. In Gnostic cosmology, the material world is ruled by archons, cosmic wardens who imprison souls within flesh and time. The tower then becomes a daring attempt to pierce their prison, a collective jailbreak disguised as architecture. The confusion of tongues was not merely punishment, but a tactical strike by the archons themselves, cutting humanity off from the gnosis that threatened their dominion. Texts from Nag Hammadi describe Jesus as the revealer who unmasks the archons' machinery, teaching souls how to slip past their control. Read with this in mind. The story of Babel shifts from morality tale to tragedy, a near-successful awakening, halted by forces who could not allow mankind to climb too high. The tower's destruction was not divine justice, it was cosmic censorship. Occult traditions later picked up these whispers. In Freemasonry, the unfinished tower represents the human quest for knowledge interrupted by external powers. The image of workers scattered, their speech fractured, becomes a symbol of humanity's lost unity. Each craft, each order, each secret society is imagined as holding a shard of the original tongue, rebuilding the tower not with bricks but with symbols, rituals, and degrees of initiation. The Hermetic tradition echoes the same idea, as above, so below. Babel becomes the archetype of this maxim, a physical attempt to mirror the heavens on earth. The punishment, in turn, is a deliberate severing of that reflection, condemning humanity to live with broken mirrors. Even in the tarot, the tower card is not about pride, but about sudden disruption of hidden ascent, lightning striking to shatter false unity. Alchemists saw Babel as a metaphor for their own art. The scattering of languages symbolized the fragmentation of the prima materia, the original substance of creation. The task of the adept was to recombine the pieces, to restore the lost unity, to rebuild Babel in the laboratory of the soul. In this sense, every retort, every furnace, every distillation was another brick in the invisible tower. For the occultist, then, Babel is not just an old story, but an ongoing project. The tower still rises, hidden in lodges, whispered in grimoires, encoded in geometry and number. Its summit remains unfinished, but the blueprint survives. And perhaps the true question is not whether Babel was real, but whether we are still building it, stone by stone, symbol by symbol, reaching again for the gate that was once slammed shut. The Tower of Babel cannot be understood in isolation. Its imagery belongs to a universal idea found across civilizations. The AXIS Mundi, the world axis, the cosmic pillar that unites heaven, earth, and the underworld. Every culture seemed to know this archetype, and each gave it a different name. In Norse myth, it was Yggdrasil, the immense ash tree whose branches reached the sky and whose roots pierced the abyss. In Hindu tradition, it was Mount Meru, the sacred mountain at the center of all universes, around which the sun, moon, and stars revolve. In China, it was Kunlun, the heavenly mountain, home of immortals and the Jade Emperor. The Mesopotamian Ziggurat was their version of the Axis Mundi, a man-made mountain meant to anchor the divine into the earthly. The biblical Tower of Babel, in this wider context, becomes one more iteration of humanity's ancient longing to build a bridge between realms. What differs is not the imagery, but the verdict. While other cultures celebrated their world axis, the Hebrew scribes turned Babel into a story of judgment and fragmentation. Why? Perhaps because, unlike myths of natural mountains or cosmic trees, Babel was about human construction. Yggdrasil grew by itself, Meru existed by divine decree, but Babel was raised by human hands. It was the audacity of replicating the Axis Mundi artificially, of forging the cosmic ladder without divine sanction, that sparked intervention. Yet the similarities cannot be ignored. The 7 levels of the Mesopotamian Ziggurat recall the 7 heavens of Islamic cosmology, the 7 chakras of Indian yoga, the 7 planetary spheres of Hermetic ascent. Each layer corresponds to a stage of initiation, a rung on the ladder of return. In this sense, Babel is a symbol repeated in dozens of traditions, the attempt to reconnect the fragmented self to the totality of existence. Even in later mysticism, the Axis Mundi persists. Medieval cathedrals were designed as vertical maps, their spires pointing to heaven, their crypts rooted in the earth. The Kaaba in Mecca functions as the center of the Islamic world, a navel around which pilgrims circumambulate. Tibetan mandalas depict mountains rising from concentric rings, stairways for meditation. The archetype refuses to die, resurfacing again and again, suggesting that the yearning Babel embodied is not a one-time rebellion, but a constant hunger in the human spirit. Thus, the Tower of Babel is part of a global language of symbols. The Axis Mundi is the spine of the world, and every attempt to build or depict it is a ritual of remembrance. The difference lies only in whether heaven blesses the ladder or breaks it in half. When the divine struck Babel, the punishment was not fire from heaven, nor a flood to wash away ambition. It was something subtler, but infinitely more devastating: confusion of tongues. Humanity, once united by a single language, suddenly spoke in fragments. What was once harmony became dissonance, and the project crumbled not because the tower fell, but because the people could no longer understand one another. On the surface, this seems like a curious choice. Why target language of all things? But if we accept that the one language was not just a dialect, but a frequency aligned with creation, then scattering speech was the equivalent of cutting the wires to a cosmic machine. The tower's power was not in its bricks, but in the chant that fueled them. To break the chant was to unplug the tower. The consequences echo across history. The confusion of languages marked the fragmentation of human consciousness itself. Once we sang in unison, now we speak in shards. Each culture carries only a fraction of the code, each tongue a sliver of the original harmony. Instead of one unified current, we are left with countless rivers, divided, conflicting, unable to rejoin. Occultists often interpret this moment as the great trauma of humanity. From that day forward, knowledge became scattered. Mysteries were hidden in symbols, guarded by secret societies, preserved in fragments of scripture. Every esoteric system, Kabbalah, Hermeticism, alchemy, mantras, runes, can be seen as attempts to recover pieces of the shattered tongue. Each claims to preserve syllables of the lost code, but none alone can restore the totality. The confusion also ensured control. A divided humanity could not unite to open the portal again. Words became barriers instead of bridges. Wars followed misunderstandings. Doctrines clashed over translations, and religions splintered into factions, each convinced they alone carried the truth. The scattering of tongues was more than linguistic. It was psychological warfare, embedding division into the very structure of thought. This is the true price of Babel's fall. Humanity lost more than a tower. We lost our voice, and without a voice we lost the power to command reality itself. What survives are only echoes, whispers in ritual, syllables vibrating in forgotten chants. Somewhere perhaps the complete language still exists, waiting to be recovered. But until then, we remain prisoners of the Babel effect. A world fractured, longing for a song we can no longer remember how to sing. If the fall of Babel shattered humanity's primordial tongue, then what remains are fragments scattered like shards of a broken mirror. But in those shards, mystics across the ages have glimpsed the original brilliance. They insist that language is not arbitrary, not mere convention, but a living technology of sound and vibration, and every syllable still carries echoes of the lost code. In Kabbalah, Hebrew letters are not just symbols, they are cosmic frequencies. Each letter embodies an energy, a vibration that shapes reality. The very act of reciting divine names, such as the 72 hidden names of God, is believed to open channels of spiritual power. For the initiate, speech is no metaphor, it is creation itself. In Hindu traditions, the primordial sound Om is said to contain the vibration of the universe, the resonance from which all existence emerges. Mantras are not prayers in the usual sense, but tools of alignment, tuning the soul like an instrument to the frequency of the divine. In Sufi mysticism, the repetition of the names of Allah, dhikr, is used to break through the veil of ordinary perception, restoring the heart to its original resonance. Even outside religion, the idea persists. Shamans chant, monks intone, witches whisper incantations. Every culture has discovered that rhythm, tone, and repetition alter consciousness, sometimes opening gateways to visions or otherworldly contact. It is as if the human voice retains an ancient memory, an instinct that sound itself is a key to hidden doors. Modern science, in its own way, circles back to the same truth. Chromatics shows how vibration shapes matter, forming intricate patterns in sand and water. Frequencies can heal or destroy. Ultrasound shatters stones, while music soothes the mind. The physical world bends, subtly but undeniably, to the laws of sound. Could this be the faint echo of Babel's original language, when one voice aligned to creation itself? Esoteric thinkers suggest that the confusion of tongues did not erase the code completely. Instead, it fragmented it into pieces, hidden across cultures and traditions. A syllable in Sanskrit, a rune in Norse, a Hebrew glyph, a Sumerian chant, each a shard of the primordial resonance. To recover the original language is not to translate words, but to recombine vibrations, to find the lost chord that reopens the cosmic gate. Perhaps this is why the builders of Babel were feared, not for their height, but for their harmony. They knew that sound is not just communication, it is power, and whoever masters that power holds the key to creation itself. Every telling of Babel forces us into a choice of interpretation. Was the tower humanity's sin or its near salvation? Was the confusion of tongues an act of divine justice or a calculated intervention to stop us from unlocking powers we were not ready to wield? These are the two faces of Babel, mirrored across centuries of theology and esoteric speculation. The orthodox reading is simple. Humanity, intoxicated by pride, attempted to storm heaven. God, in his justice, struck down their arrogance and scattered their unity. Babel becomes a moral parable. Man must know his place. For countless generations, this version has served to reinforce humility and obedience. Yet its very simplicity is suspicious. The brevity of the Genesis account, the peculiar choice of punishment, and the echoes of Mesopotamian myth suggest that something deeper was being concealed. The alternative view, preserved in fragments of mysticism, Gnosticism, and occult philosophy, is more unsettling. Humanity was not punished for failure, but for almost succeeding. The tower was not arrogance, but initiation, a structure meant to restore the lost connection between heaven and earth, perhaps even to bypass the dominion of the archons, or the jealous gods who sought to keep humanity bound. In this light, the confusion of tongues was less justice than sabotage. Think of the implications. If Babel was punishment, then humanity's destiny is obedience. But if Babel was sabotage, then humanity's destiny is potential interrupted. Our unity was broken not because it was evil, but because it was dangerous to powers that wanted us kept below. Suddenly, the tower is not a warning against pride, but a reminder of what was taken from us. Occult traditions lean heavily into this second view. For Masons, the unfinished tower symbolizes knowledge withheld. For alchemists, the scattered languages represent the broken prima materia awaiting recombination. For Gnostics, the fall of Babel is a tragedy of cosmic censorship, a firewall placed between mankind and its true inheritance. Which is correct? Perhaps both. Perhaps the tower was both arrogance and illumination, an attempt by mortals to seize powers they did not yet understand. The divine, in mercy or in fear, fractured the code before it could be misused. But whether it was protection or punishment, one fact remains: the tower's interruption left humanity wounded, fractured, and forever haunted by the memory of a unity we can no longer recover. And so the riddle remains: did God save us from destruction, or did he keep us from salvation? Up to this point, we have peeled away layers of myth, history, and mysticism. But now we reach the forbidden heart of the question. What if the Tower of Babel was not only a temple, not only a symbol, but a working portal? Imagine the scene. A vast plain in Shinar, thousands of workers moving in rhythm, voices unified in a chant whose syllables aligned with cosmic vibrations. Bricks consecrated by fire and inscription, stacked not merely as walls, but as resonant nodes, amplifying the collective frequency. The tower rising tier by tier, each level a reflection of the heavens above, aligned with the stars, calibrated to the planetary spheres. What we have is not a skyscraper, but a machine of initiation, an engine of transcendence. If this reconstruction is true, then the divine intervention makes sudden sense. The danger was not architectural height, but metaphysical breach. Humanity was seconds away, in mythic terms, from reopening a channel that had long been sealed. Whether one calls it heaven, the upper aeons, or other dimensions, the tower may have been designed as a literal access point. Not a rebellion to dethrone God, but an experiment to cross thresholds reserved for higher beings. Gnostic whispers hint at this possibility. If the archons rule the material realm, then Babel was humanity's jailbreak, its jailbreak nearly successful. The confusion of tongues was not punishment, but containment, a firewall installed in the psyche of mankind. Even Jewish mysticism carries echoes of this. The builders inscribed symbols of the zodiac, aligned the structure to constellations, and invoked the holy tongue in unison. They were building not upward, but inward, raising a stairway that led through consciousness itself. And here lies the climax. If Babel was a portal, then its destruction was humanity's greatest loss. It means there once existed a moment when we were on the verge of becoming more than human, of piercing the veil, of reclaiming the divine link severed at the dawn of history. Instead, we were divided, disarmed, reduced to fragments. The portal was closed, but perhaps not forever. Every temple, every ziggurat, every pyramid may be an echo of Babel's design. Every mantra, every sacred syllable, every ritual might be an attempt to reassemble the lost formula. And somewhere in the labyrinth of languages, the key still waits. The question is terrifying. What happens if humanity ever speaks with one voice again? Will the portal reopen? And if it does, who or what will come through? The Tower of Babel remains one of the Bible's most haunting enigmas, not because of what is written, but because of what is left unsaid. A handful of verses hint at a unity shattered, a project abandoned, and a humanity forever fractured. Yet behind those fragments we glimpse something far greater, a civilization that dared to touch the heavens, not through arrogance alone, but through knowledge, sound, and symbol. Perhaps the tower was only legend, a cautionary tale against pride. Perhaps it was a memory of Mesopotamian ziggurats, sanctuaries where gods descended. Or perhaps, as the occult whispers suggest, it was more, a machine designed to pierce the veil, a proto-portal silenced before it could open. Whatever the truth, the story remains an open wound in the human imagination. For what truly terrifies us is not the punishment, but the possibility. What if the builders were right? What if unity of language is the missing key to transcendence? What if humanity once stood on the threshold of divinity and was pushed back, not out of mercy, but out of fear that we might succeed? In a world divided by languages, nations, and beliefs, the dream of Babel still lingers. Every temple spire, every mystic chant, every ritual circle is a shadow of that unfinished tower. We climb in fragments, searching for the harmony that was once whole. And maybe that is the ultimate mystery. Babel was never truly destroyed. It still stands, scattered across our tongues, hidden in our symbols, waiting for the day when the pieces are drawn back together. So ask yourself, was the Tower of Babel humanity's greatest sin, or its greatest almost achievement? Did heaven save us from destruction, or rob us of our birthright? And if the key to the portal still lies in language, vibration, and unity, what happens when one day we find it again? This is Eternal Enigma, where we walk the shadowed paths of history and myth, not to provide answers, but to hand you the keys to questions that should never be ignored. If you wish to keep exploring the mysteries that religion and history have tried to silence, subscribe, join us, and dare to question. Because Babel may be gone, but its echoes still call.